What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be checking out the Undeniably Canon Five Nights at Freddy's timeline. One of you guys requested this, so I decided to just react to it because why not? Let's have a little bit of fun. Apparently, this is going to be like a comedic version of the timeline, the FNAF timeline that we all have watched videos on. You guys know, if you're here on this channel, the first video that I ever did FNAF related was a reaction to the FNAF timeline by Game Theory. Great video, loved it, and it's been history ever since. So we're gonna check out this video is created by the Oofed Troop. Shouts out to him for creating this video. All of their links will be in the description down below. Please check them out, of course. Let's just jump into the video, guys. Here's the video. Let's start.
But hey, that's just a
Speaking of Game Theory, here he is.
A game theory. Thanks for watching.
Hey you look like you're interested in some FNAF lore.
Absolutely.
Sick of all the speculation?
Yes.
Do you want something that's undeniably canon?
Yes. I mean, no. What?
Well,
why not?
that's too bad. I'm telling you anyway.
Yay, all my friends are here. Purple guy.
The year was 1983, January to be exact. Local nobodies Henry Emily and William Afton were walking down the streets of Hurricane, Utah, when suddenly they noticed that not once in their life have they ever caught a glimpse of a yellow grizzly bear. It was then their fates were sealed, and they knew that they must fulfill their destiny. Henry and William were something of robotics enthusiasts, so they finally used their untapped potential to create the most realistic animatronic bear imaginable. On their first attempt, they made a decrepit, muddy yellow bear with giant teeth and claws. This was
terrifying.
realistic. William, however, remembered that in the trunk of his car rested a cluster of discs that could emit audio frequencies that would fool people into seeing real bears. They slapped
just had those
boys on this animatronic, and suddenly it took the form of a beautiful golden grizzly, who they then named Ferdinand von Bernard. Not only did he look the part and have a voice like honey butter, but the mind-altering audio accidentally gave him sentience and cosmic power beyond our human understanding. This was very dangerous, but the partners in furry shenanigans were not swayed.
Furry
That
shenanigans.
is, until the entire town evacuated at the sight of this golden.
Even Scott's running.
Turns out people are scared of loose bears. Who would have thunk it? Of course, this fear wasn't for nothing. Ferdinand was caught dining on a local restaurant owner, and he fled from the crime scene before law enforcement could get to him.
Don't go, we're desperate. Hurricane, Utah.
William and Henry realized they had been a slight bit overzealous with their first creation. Good thing is, literally nobody knew or cared who they were, so they got away with this scot-free. Later that month,
Scot-free. Scott Cawthon.
they designed an animatronic simply based on Ferdinand's likeness.
I see what you did there.
This character was quite a downgrade, being both simpler and stupider. This didn't matter to the duo, though, as they loved their creation. And with that, Fredbear was born. At first, they had nowhere to actually put him, so they opted for the dump. He was truly a diamond in the rough.
They put him at the dump? No!
Amazingly, this attempt at entertainment was amusing enough to the citizens of Hurricane that they gave William and Henry enough money to afford a recently vacated.
People went to the dump to see Fredbear entertain, and they were like, you know what? We need to give these guys a restaurant. Because, like, why not? Papa Thurgood's Family Diner? Nah.
Fredbear was going to be a star.
We're changing that name.
This animatronic was extremely poorly designed, and their attempts at granting him artificial intelligence quickly turned sour. On February 31st, 1983, his first performance on stage in front of children prompted him to spontaneously combust from a nervous breakdown. William and Henry, heartbroken at this tragic event, cracked down to ensure this would never happen again. This also prompted William to threaten the United States government, and they met his demands to strike February 31st from the calendar forever.
As they
After
should?
that, they set their sights on making something with no flaws. But then they made springlock suits. In an attempt to both ease the animatronics' nerves and not allow them their legally required breaks, Henry and William created mechanisms that could lock the endoskeleton parts to the inner edges of the suit for a person to climb inside and cover.
Worst invention ever.
For extra safety precautions, they created a partner for the new Fredbear 2.0 to ease his nerves. For some reason, the best name they came up with for Fredbear's partner was Spring Bonnie. William was insistent on this name, and Henry felt too threatened to argue against it. Where the safety precautions ended, however, was the fact that the spring locks holding the endoskeleton pieces away from a person's vital organs were made out of paper clips, and the lightest sneeze could set
I can see them, jeez.
off. Truly brilliant inventors, those two.
Great
The
invention.
dynamic duo had now created a dynamic duo. William was the only one who had the nerve to actually test the Springlock suit, and it turned out he enjoyed dancing around as a yellow rabbit a little too much. Henry was unbothered by this though, as William was still perfectly capable of handling their finances in character. A few months had gone by, and Fredbear's Family Diner
That's
was
not
an
the
absolute
slightest bit
success.
weird.
Not only were Fredbear and Spring Bonnie beloved by the now enlightened Mormon population of Utah, William even managed to lock in a deal with a low-budget animation studio in order to make a cartoon called Fredbear and Friends. The
My
one
favorite
downside,
cartoon.
though, was the studio needed more characters and they refused any more yellow ones. Out of obligation, Leopold, Theodore, Mirabella, and Foxy were created.
Mirabella, Leopold.
No, Mirabella's not.
Wait, yeah, I was gonna say, wait, she said no more yellow characters. Chica is yellow.
Yellow, she's Xanthophyll. You're just seeing things.
What? What? All right.
Surely these blights
Sure.
to everything William and Henry stood for would never see the light of day in any other context. William and Henry were at their peak, and William finally regained custody of his children. However, one of his sons, whose name has been stricken from the record, waltzed into the back room of Fredbear's and saw Fredbear smoking a cigar. Fredbear's blatant nonchalance about his respiratory health was truly traumatizing for the child. In a panic, the child started to run out the door but accidentally tripped over the foot of Spring Bonnie. Unbeknownst to him, the animatronic was being worn by Harold the janitor. This collision was enough to snap open the flimsy spring lock and impale Harold every which way. Harold's soul, heartbroken by his untimely demise in his boss's backup fursuit, transformed into pure agony and he became a shadow creature. He gave himself a really cool name, but unfortunately he never learned how to spell, so it came out like this. Shockingly okay with witnessing this occur, the child went home and invited his older brother, Michael,
Purple guy crying in the back.
with him. However, there was foul play. This child was actually just a terrible human being and slid extra cards into the deck, causing Michael to draw 8 turns in a row. Enraged, Michael threw on a Foxy mask and started screeching at the child.
I'd be pissed too.
The child, annoyed by his behavior, decided to humor Mike until he got bored of doing this and pretended to sob 24/7. Maybe, just maybe, this would guilt trip him. However, Michael was far more resilient than the child anticipated, and this behavior kept going for a whole week. The child, craving literally anything else to do with his time, walked into Fredbear's again in an attempt to face his fears before getting cornered by Trevor the cashier wearing a Fredbear suit. The child saw the reasoning for this, as Trevor was holding a gnat for a mediocre dentist's office in his hand, and so the child deliberately ran into Trevor to set off the spring locks in his suit. Trevor's
This child is
spirit,
evil.
a bit relieved by the matter in all honesty, turned into a more chill shadow creature that just kinda walked around convincing people to join his conga line. The child returned home, completely okay with the fact he just killed a
As he
man,
should.
and told his Fredbear plushie everything he did.
What?
The next day,
That's
Michael
kinda
and
weird.
his Uno buddies barged into the child's room to take him to Fredbear's for his birthday. The child was still committing to the crying act, but this was a bad idea as it just made them come up with the idea of shoving him in Fredbear's mouth. So, that's exactly what they did. They mockingly told the child to give Fredbear a big kiss, which
A bite
the
of
animatronic
83.
took immediate notice of. This was a very dangerous situation for his career, so without thinking, Fredbear clamped down his jaw on the child's skull. This terrified Michael and his friends for about 5 seconds, until the child hopped out of it unscathed. Turns out, William and Henry gave the animatronics rubber teeth. Great safety feature. The child was livid.
Rubber
and threatened
teeth?
to do the job again. Mike didn't really know what this meant, but it sounded scary enough for his buddy Jeremy Fitzgerald II to knock the child unconscious with a chair. This only distressed Michael more, so he rushed the child to the hospital where he was diagnosed with a mild concussion. When the child awoke, he looked at Michael and told him that he never existed. When Michael asked what that was supposed to mean, the child fused with him and turned a little bit pale.
What the fuck?
This was just a
White
very bad
boyification.
day for Michael. When he went to tell William about it, William had no clue what he meant by little brother. He told Mike to stop making up stories,
Never
crack a
existed.
disrespectful mask, and take up engineering. This sounded good enough for him, so that's what he did. But, turns out, the employees at Fredbear's called the police because Harold and Trevor's bodies were just laying on the floor, and nobody cared to do anything about it until right then. So, the restaurant was shut down, and the news media blamed it on the bite of 83 in order to abruptly end Fredbear's career. They were just jealous.
Wait, what did it say? Local bear animatronic Fredbear has been accused of taking a slight nibble, mayhaps even a chomp, at local child. We don't remember their name. Sources say said child was related to diner co-owner William Afton, but he has denied any claims of this child existing. Regardless, it's abundantly clear that Fredbear is not to be trusted. What will he bite next? A slice of pizza? The horror. I wouldn't trust my kids with him, and I'm an unmarried college intern. Nonetheless, the good folks here at the Hurricane Screamer have bribed the police department to execute Fredbear this coming Tuesday. Be there in it. My neighbor Susan is reading this. Please, all of your delicious meatloaf. Oh my god, not the meatloaf. Actually sounds good though.
Abruptly end Fredbear's career. They were just.
Wonder if we bribed the cops too well.
Were back to square one. Because of the abundant controversy and investigations, they laid low for a couple of years. In 1980,
Ferdinand's Returnanand.
Controversy and investigations, they laid low for a couple of years. But in 1985, they finally opened a new location. With the amount of money they had earned from Fredbears, they were luckily capable of buying out a new restaurant space with ease. Unfortunately, Fredbear was publicly executed 2 years prior. So, William did the unthinkable. They made animatronics of the cartoon characters they had made out of reluctant necessity. Leopold was their immediate decision for the new mascot,
Freddy,
as he was actually a bear. He wasn't golden, but he would do. But
change that name.
Didn't exactly resonate with the public, so
please.
After 5 seconds of brainstorming, they renamed him Freddy Fazbear.
Yes.
The initial plan was for him to be partnered with Spring Bonnie, but William refused to work with any type of grizzly that wasn't golden. So, Henry opted to rebrand Theodore to simply Bonnie, and that worked well enough. However, making these two characters so derivative of their superior counterparts worried Henry and William, as the public could possibly see through their ruse. So, they added another character to the band to distract people, Mirabella. Given the fact that she didn't have overtly feminine characteristics, though, Henry and William renamed her Chica to make sure any Spanish speakers knew she was a girl. There was one last cartoon character they could use, being Foxy the Pirate. This was a gimmick that the Fredbear and Friends show added to drive up ratings. Henry was fine with the concept, but William hated it. For the time being, the partners settled on shoving him in the corner of the building, far away from the three they actually tolerated. After opening the location, however, the two quickly realized that children didn't actually care about the 3 stage performers. Something about theming being more interesting. As more and more children flocked around Foxy's Pirate Cove, William immediately ran up and kicked the poor animatronic in the kneecaps. This put him out of order for the time being, and William tore him up after closing to ensure it would stay that way. Somehow this didn't scare anyone away, and everyone just immediately piled back over to watch Freddy sing about bullfighting. Henry and William were truly living the life. They lost their beloved golden animals, sure, but they were still happy. That is, until one fateful day.
Hey, can I borrow $5?
Yeah, sure. Well, not actually this specific day.
What?
It was 2 days after this that things fell to pieces. William, after a long day of work, was extremely hungry. You may be wondering why he didn't just eat dinner at Freddy's, but truth be told, he hated the pizza there. They blew all their budget on good tablecloths. So, instead, he opted to drive down to a local rundown Carl's Jr. on that fateful, rainy Tuesday night. Hello, I'd like an original Angus burger and a large Coca-Cola.
That'll be $5, please.
This was the moment that William Afton snapped. Where are my $5?
But you have a 20.
William sped 1 mile over the speed limit and pulled up at Freddy's to enact revenge on Henry. However, by pure chance, Henry's daughter Charlie was locked out of the building. William, attempting to help her back in, looked at her in the eyes trying to explain his plight. However, with the rage in his heart at that very moment, his mere stare was a death sentence.
What?
Charlie flopped over immediately from this. William, panicking over this murder, threw her in the alley next to the restaurant and drove off before anyone could see what had happened.
He killed this man's son for $5 when he had 20? Oh my god, so this is why you don't borrow money from your friends, and if you do, you pay them back.
After this, the restaurant security puppet, designed to keep track of the children assigned to it, walked out of the building to find Charlie. When it got to her body, her soul grew an attachment to the character, and she stuck around in hopes a new body would be made so she could fuse with it. You'd expect for this to be the end, but the sudden realization of his true power gave William an idea. With his instantaneous death stare, he could quickly and quietly send a horrible message to Henry. He circled back around to Freddy's and made a beeline toward the safe room that contained...
Wait. The damn $5 turned this man into a serial killer.
...the retired Springlock suits. He quickly equipped his Spring Bonnie suit and darted around the restaurant telling kids that their dead dogs were alive in the safe room with Old Man Jenkins. None of them actually had dogs, but they all assumed that they'd managed to get a free one anyway. Of course, they realized very quickly that they were conned. William waltzed into the safe room with 5 total children inside, but before he could do anything, the child named Cassidy kicked him in the shins so hard it knocked the pink out of him. Luckily, he duct taped the spring locks to the edges of his suit so they couldn't go off. But he was still made livid by this attempt on his life, so he stared down each one and took them out. William wondered if perhaps he had gone overboard with his evil deeds, but figured that 5 children for $5 was a reasonable trade-off. As a disclaimer to all of you at home, murder is bad. Meanwhile, a drunk man named Dave...
Yo, I sneezed and I'm laughing at the same time. Something about that just was funny. I gotta go back.
Attempt on his life, so he stared down each one and took them out. William wondered if perhaps he had gone overboard with his evil deeds, but figured that 5 children for $5 was a reasonable trade. As a disclaimer to all of you at home,
5 children for $5 was a good...
A drunk man
okay,
Dave
sure.
had just been turned away from juniors and drove home. He was a terrible father and insisted on invading his son's privacy for the heinous act of the boy, locking his door. The boy, whose name was Andrew, broke his window and left the house. Turns out, Trevor the cashier, at this point dubbing himself Shadow Freddy, convinced Andrew to participate in his conga line to Freddy's. Unfortunately, Shadow Freddy's favorite spot to wrap up his conga lines was the safe room, and the two just so happened to come in as William finished stuffing 4 of the children into the animatronics.
Oh my god.
William, surprised by his sudden extra child, accidentally gave him the death stare, and now he was left with an extra body to stuff. And to make things more inconvenient, there weren't any more characters to pick from. This, however, is when he realized that he could just stuff both Cassidy and Andrew into the Fredbear suit.
Jesus.
William knew nobody actually wore the thing, so he was certain it would go completely unnoticed. After this, he left the building like nothing happened and drove home to sleep in his safe and comfy Spring Bonnie pajama suit. It was getting to be an obsession. After this point, Henry was very obviously devastated. However, he had no idea who actually did it. The cameras were broken and the only accusations were that someone did it while in a mascot costume. Police promptly arrested a man from a completely unrelated pizzeria. Fortunately, Freddy's didn't get shut down for this, and Henry attempted to keep things going for a while. William had sent him a letter saying he was off on vacation for the time being, so Henry was left to handle finances on his lonesome. But, people rapidly started losing interest at Freddy's. The animatronics smelled horrible and everyone finally noticed just how bad the pizza tasted. So, by year's end, the restaurant shut down. Henry decided to take a break from it all, and when William returned from vacation, he realized he could seize this opportunity and make a pizzeria with complete creative control. His daughter, Elizabeth, served as the perfect muse, and he proceeded to make an animatronic that looked nothing like her. He named it Circus Baby. Don't ask why, it's not elaborated on. However, after telling Elizabeth all about this animatronic, he suddenly got the idea to use Baby for a different purpose than simple entertainment. William had recently noticed the animatronics from the closed Freddy's location acting strange, and upon further investigation, he discovered a substance that he called Remnant. His new idea entailed having Baby and a new set of animatronics themed after her work together in order to collect more Remnant from children. So, he made Funtime Freddy and Bon Bon for easy marketing appeal. Then, he finally remade Foxy in his own vision, stripping all of that filthy pirate gimmick from him and making him a lovely coat of white and pink. Funtime
the white and pink Foxy's dope,
in
though.
Every way, and his lack of originality meant that nobody would prefer her over the characters William actually wanted people to like.
Man, really hated Foxy. He was really out to get this man.
This one wasn't made for murder purposes so much as it was made out of contempt. For who? His ex-wife, Eleanor Schmidt, who craved to make an animatronic that was better at ballet than her. She was an accountant, so this was easy. However, upon coming to William's house to pick up Elizabeth for a week, Eleanor saw what he was building. Angered by the fact that this character was better at ballet than her, a woman who never once thought about it until right then, she fused with Valora in a fit of rage, and now William was stuck with a robot wife that danced around his workshop every day.
What the fuck?
But no matter. William secured a building to open this brand new sister location of Freddy's, named Circus Baby's Pizza World, and progress was going smoothly. He had some test runs of the pizzeria, and let some groups of people come there early for birthday parties. But this plan quickly turned sour as Elizabeth joined a party and ignored his specific demands not to see Baby. To William's surprise, children don't listen to you if you say not to play with something they want. As a result, Baby's murder equipment activated as soon as Elizabeth was alone with her. William instantly shut down development on the restaurant. He was very distraught over this,
and lost his whole family.
He should have considered before trying to murder more children. Despite the local population being completely confused by this sudden turn of events, William blamed it on gas leaks and never spoke of it, and instead went back to Henry for them to start work on a new Freddy's location.
He's like, yeah, I missed you, old friend.
On just fixing up the old animatronics from the previous location and scrubbing them down to fix the odor problem. However, William caught sight of Foxy and formed a new idea in his head out of pure hatred. He told Henry his idea for the new design philosophy of the animatronics he had in mind. He introduced a newfangled plastic finish, flashy makeup, and to top it all off, William unleashed his newfound obsession with prefixes and dubbed them toy animatronics. In order to further justify this decision, he also proposed bringing back the security puppet character as just a normal marionette.
Oh yeah, my
and finally
favorite.
created the hero of this universe, Balloon Boy.
Balloon
Getting all of
Boy.
that out of the way, William went straight to explaining to Henry why Foxy needed to be white and pink. And with that, the new face of Freddy's was underway. The location opened in 1987 with a lot of good press, and people were flocking to it. Why did they put so much trust in this new location? Simple. Henry and William advertised that there would no longer be terrible pizza. This is because they got rid of the kitchen. This restaurant had no food. You'd think this would be a problem, but kids really like to go there for the characters alone. And by character,
Wait, they got rid of the kitchen? Like completely? So in FNAF 2, there's no kitchen in the building? I guess there's not. I don't remember like on the cameras them having a kitchen. What the hell?
I mean character, as even despite William's every last effort of making Foxy relevant, the kids now flocked to Toy Foxy's Kids Cove to tear him apart and put her back together. They thought they could make him look better, but without technical experience, she looked less like a pirate and more like a metal tumbleweed. William had now found a new rage spurred by Foxy's mere existence, and so he enacted a second missing children's incident to cripple the restaurant's success.
Of course.
This time, however, Henry had been paying attention. He saw the camera recordings of Spring Bonnie luring children to the safe room and realized that William was behind this the entire time. He immediately fired William and told him to never show his face again. William realized that this was a big problem. Henry may have let him off easy by not calling the authorities.
Right.
If anyone else checked anything, he'd be caught for sure.
What the hell? Why did you not call the authority? I know that you're friends, but still, like, it's killing kids.
So, after ruffling through old newspapers about his murders to see if he liked any of the parents' names, he stole the name Dave Miller and applied for a job as a night guard at the location. Using this position, he tampered with the facial recognition scanners they implemented in the animatronics and wiped the camera recordings clean. On top of this, he beat up all of the old animatronics just to put them in their place after seeing Freddy walk around. He even tore off Bonnie's face for not being deserving of the mantle he once bore. Bonnie, possessed by little Jeremy Fitzgerald, was merely a prophecy of more face trauma to come for that bloodline.
Aw.
After getting done with that,
Poor
William
Bonnie.
could have sworn he saw the puppet floating around whispering to everything it could see. This made him wonder if this was actually Charlie, but he didn't care enough to check, so he left it alone. The new set of children, though? William hadn't bothered actually stuffing them anywhere, so the puppet guided them to select new vessels of their own. Instead of individual characters like it was expecting, though, all of them voluntarily possessed Balloon Boy just because it was mildly amusing. William, still presenting as Dave, tried to maintain a job as a day shift guard after this, but was quickly fired for having bad vibes. Also, he kept going into the parts and service room to kick the old Foxy animatronic in the shin.
Leave Foxy
Now that the night
alone!
guard position was open, one of Michael Afton's old Uno buddies applied for the job. Jeremy Fitzgerald II. He was actually pretty decent at it, but it got extremely stressful because Balloon Boy staged a coup against him with the other animatronics. So, once the week was over, he transferred over to the day shift position. Balloon Boy wasn't going to let Jeremy get away free though, and proceeded to publicly attack him and bite out his frontal lobe.
Oh my god.
Wow. That face trauma prophecy came true quickly. But hey, don't worry, it grew back within a month. But this incident, dubbed the Bite of 87, was enough to finally get—
Surprise, surprise, there was another incident at Freddy's only like, what, a week? After another string of disappearance at the location, local rebel Jeremy Fitzgerald II was reported to have had his frontal lobe bitten out by one of Fazbear Entertainment's brand new animatronics. Now that's what I call toys you don't want to play with. Eyewitness reports claim that the culprit was a short and stout Balloon Boy, but former co-owner William Afton has confirmed the accusation is baseless, as BB has no working jaw design. All right then. And then he blamed it on Mangle, huh? When asked if Mangle is male or female, Afton said yes. He also went as far to say the true culprit was the Mangle.
establishment closed.
Just
On the
hates
night after this
Foxy.
attack, they needed a guard to make sure Balloon Boy didn't escape. Instead of behaving though, local menace Fritz Smith tampered with all the animatronics and made them extremely aggressive just because he thought it'd be funny. Company higher-ups didn't appreciate this and quickly took care of the
Understandable.
problem. Thus, 1987 ended with another location shut down abruptly. Henry scrapped all the toy animatronics after this except for Toy Freddy and the puppet. Turns out Toy Freddy was already retiring, as he really wanted to become a gamer. His endeavors were successful and he led a happy life. The puppet
My man is a
just
Twitch
vanished.
streamer.
Henry, spooked by the idea of a sock monkey with a clown mask coming back to haunt him, started making blueprints for a counterattack if that day ever came. Now, Henry had his sights set on repairing and reusing the old animatronics for one last attempt at the pizzeria business without William in his way. However, this plan was easier said than done. Henry, with all of his financial incompetence, had next to no funds to enact
No
this idea,
free money.
so he briefly attempted a public fund to try and get money. After a day of trying, he gave up with exactly $0 earned. Henry was broke, sure, but he had some powerful resolve. So, he decided to steal back the building he and William used in 1985 to recycle for his new pizzeria. Despite this being very much illegal, nobody actually wanted to use the building given its history, so the city decided not to bother Henry when he claimed it back as his. Being a one-man
They
show,
just let him.
Henry had to take his sweet time renovating the place. But after about a year, he managed to open it back up with somewhat new animatronics. And, to his surprise, he was actually moderately successful.
Wow.
Due to a dwindling bear population in Utah, there was growing demand to see one in person, and the populace reluctantly decided that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was their best shot at doing so.
What?
Unfortunately, the working conditions were
Fair
very
enough.
much terrible. The most loyal employee of Fazbear Entertainment,
Phone
only
Guy.
known by his co-workers as Phone Guy, was assassinated by the animatronics during his final week working the night shift due to looking suspiciously purple. The good thing is, he had recorded a helpful guide on how to not get assassinated right before getting assassinated. Henry was not ready to let this casualty
That's how you do it.
negligence ruin things for him though, so he covered up Phone Guy's death and business went as usual afterward. William, still being unemployed and bored, decided now was a good time to take revenge on Henry. Again, he realized that he still had an entire stockpile of animatronics he never got to use. With the power of legal loopholes, he managed to kickstart Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals. For suspiciously low prices, the average family could have a giant chrome animatronic shipped to their doorstep to throw parties for their children.
Oh,
What could go wrong?
what a wonderful
Well,
idea.
Baby's eyes were green. For a moment, William thought he just misremembered her eye color, but then she started talking to him about very personal matters, and he realized Elizabeth had possessed her. Instead of doing anything immediate to solve this problem, he locked her in the rental facility and wrote a note on the fridge to take care of it later. After a few more years, Michael Afton finally graduated engineering school and came back home.
Yeah, he's
William
back.
was delighted by his son's return, as he was conveniently useful for his newest plot against Henry. However, he wanted Michael to be fully prepared for what was to come, so William locked Mike into a crude replica of their house that vaguely resembled the layout of Freddy's. In this fake house, William had prepared makeshift animatronics with dangerously high safety hazards to attack Michael, so he could learn how to defend himself against the real deal. After roughly a week of watching Mike handle the process, William noticed something went wrong. Something broke into the fake house. Upon further investigation, he discovered some discarded audio discs lying on the ground. It was
Oh,
Ferdinand
no!
von Bernard.
Ferdinand's
Having wandered
back!
the wilds of Utah
He's
for exactly
returning.
a decade, he returned to Hurricane to wreak havoc on his creators. So, he targeted William's favorite, only, son using his unaltered form. But Mike was resilient, and he managed to avoid Ferdinand long enough that he got bored, reapplied his audio discs, and finally wandered away. Given the unplanned attack on Michael, William ended the testing process.
We'll see
and
him again
gaslit Mike,
eventually.
believing it was all just a nightmare before changing the subject to getting a job. To ensure that Henry wouldn't tell Michael what he knows about his father, William told Mike that he should apply using his mother's maiden name rather than Afton. That way he doesn't draw attention to himself for being related to everyone's favorite former manager, of course.
Smart.
So, Mike Schmidt worked for a whole week at this place. The animatronics tried to assassinate him due to his good looks, or so he assumed. After working an extra night and being applauded by Henry, he was then instructed by William to sabotage the animatronics using his new engineering skills. Why do I need to disable their AI? It builds character, and Henry still owes me $5. Michael wasn't buying this,
Of course.
so he decided to do the exact opposite and crank them all up to the maximum setting to challenge himself for the end of his week. But due to the animatronics
Why would
scent
you do
rubbing
that?
off on him, Henry fired him for body odor and inadvertently caused a personal grudge. Before leaving, Mike snuck into the back and disabled all of the animatronic systems to spite Henry. Now that the animatronics didn't work, everyone stopped caring about Freddy's again. Henry's profits plummeted, and he was ultimately forced to shut the place down by the end of 1993. After hearing this news, William was ecstatic. He began marketing the Circus Baby rental service even harder, and proceeded to begin his final plan. William had needed Freddy's closed for more reasons than just spite. The Fun Times Remnant collection was not working as frequently as he hoped, and if he wanted to understand the substance at all, he needed more of it quickly. So, he made sure he had free reign to tear apart the animatronics to harvest their remnant and leave. After sneaking into the now abandoned Freddy's, he set up camp in the safe room since the animatronics were programmed not to go in there. But then he remembered Michael had completely deactivated them, and they would only move if the souls possessing them were motivated enough to. Luckily, Shadow Freddy suddenly appeared, and William bribed him to start a conga line leading into the safe room so he could dismantle all the animatronics. His plan worked flawlessly. In the animatronics' weakened state, William was able to tear them apart using nothing but his bare hands. Unfortunately for him, some of the remnant spilled and formed into the visible spirits of the missing children. Terrified that they might be able to kick him in the shins, he ran to his trusty spring Bonnie suit and put it back on for the first time since 1987. Feeling empowered despite this accomplishing nothing, William began to laugh at the ghosts. But in his self-indulgent celebration, he failed to realize that the duct tape holding back the spring locks had fallen off, and the leaky ceiling proceeded to snap them shut. The ghosts, finding his inconvenience hilarious, faded away for the time being so they could gossip about him elsewhere. While normally being impaled like this would result in immediate death, the spring lock failures these suits cause are painful enough to consistently cause so much agony that life is maintained in some way. While Harry the janitor got the short end of the stick and became a miserable shadow creature, William was now one with his beloved rabbit suit. Realizing he wasn't gonna properly die anytime soon, William Afton came up with a new name for his new form. He called himself Springtrap. And with that, we end this chapter of the timeline.
What a video.
What about the rest of it? I'm drawing it out for suspense. And this is a lot to cover, but pretend it's only for suspense.
But what about Ferdinand von...
Don't worry about him. I'm sure he won't do anything crazy before this is all done. Alright,
yeah, sure. Sure. What a great first video, though. Had me on the edge of my seat. There's... Oh! It tried to get me there. I actually didn't jump. I didn't jump. All right, we're gonna watch the second episode. All right, here's part 2.
Hello again. I've kept you waiting long enough. Are you ready for... Oh, it's you.
It's Ferdinand.
Where are they?
Oh.
You just wanted their chair. All right, fair enough. Now that that's settled, let's jump back into the most accurate portrayal of the FNAF timeline you'll ever hear.
This is very accurate. This really is the canon timeline. Why didn't he just pay him back the $5?
1993. William Afton, sitting in the safe room of the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, finally got done writhing in pain from his spring lock failure. He thought about reintegrating himself back into society, but before he could make a decision on that front, the ghosts of the missing children reappeared before him. Instead of attacking him though, it seemed they had called it even to ask for a favor. They were very bored, and realized that Springtrap was probably able to figure out how to convert a camera monitor into a TV. Springtrap agreed to do this for them, given he was just as bored as they were. Unfortunately, there was no practical way to get any real channels set up with the materials they had, so everyone had to settle with watching the same 3 VHS tapes of Seinfeld episodes.
Seinfeld? Oh, I would die.
Henry Emily began to grow restless. It had been at least a week since he had shut down Freddy's, and he already tanked his finances within that time. So, Henry looked for another option. The city permanently banned him from opening a new business, but they never said anything about running an existing one.
Oh,
he immediately ran to the Afton household to beg William for a manager's position at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals. When he got there, however, Michael Afton opened the door.
You fired me.
I also fired your father. Where is he?
He said something about vandalizing your house. Hasn't come back since. Now leave.
Out of options, Henry decided he'd try to sue Afton Robotics to claim the rights to the rental business. To his surprise, this actually went smoothly. The only person William had left to handle something like this was rather eager to have a boss again. So, he willingly let Henry win the case to absorb the company into Fazbear Entertainment.
Wow.
Despite the success, Henry was still worried that William might come back and ruin things for him, so he decided to take measures to ensure that he couldn't. After checking his house and seeing that nothing was vandalized, Henry's next idea was to check the abandoned Freddy's location. Knowing William, it was very likely that the place was broken into for nefarious purposes. With that in mind, Henry barged into the building and followed the trail of Seinfeld sounds until he found Springtrap. Unfazed by his old friend being a corpse rabbit now, Henry fully explained that he seized control of Afton Robotics and was capitalizing off of William's work. This made Springtrap livid. and the two started to settle things the old-fashioned
Final
way.
Fantasy VII
Henry, being
style.
much more nimble than the walking corpse, managed to grab Foxy's dismembered leg and bash Springtrap in the shins before knocking him out. Fearing the possibility that Springtrap would try to sue Henry back, he took this opportunity to throw him into the safe room and board it up. Now, there was no way William could retake his own company. Henry's confidence had never been stronger,
Valid.
so he raced back into his new office to try and figure out why he couldn't break a 50 properly. What he didn't realize was that one of the animatronics, Ballora, had snuck up behind him to figure out what the sound of failure was all about. Fed up with Henry's incompetence, Ballora pushed him out of his chair to manage finances herself. Henry realized what a great convenience this was, so he left her to it and went off
What
to
a queen.
inspect the other animatronics. Turns out, he hated them. With everyone running around violently while Baby rambled on about the different equipment in the facility, Henry realized he would not be able to put up with the animatronics having this much freedom. As a result, he implemented remote-controlled shock collars on all of them to get them to leave him alone. Except Ballora, she was too intimidating for him. The others weren't going to tolerate this, so Baby hatched a plan to get them all out of there. Although she had a direct line of contact with Funtime Freddy and Foxy, they needed to break into Henry's office to get Ballora. Right as they were about to bash the door in, Ballora stormed out, as she had just discovered Henry wasn't going to pay her. Suddenly, something clicked in Baby's memory. Last
Just
time she
like,
had seen something
just like
this
how he didn't pay William.
was when her mother, Eleanor Schmidt, found out she'd have to pay child support for William.
Oh.
Clearly, this was the same person. Although Ballora initially wasn't interested in listening to anyone, Baby used her #1 strategy to get her mother to do anything.
Hey, dummy. I bet you can't help us escape.
Ballora, now adequately motivated to prove Baby wrong,
She's ready to
immediately
go.
led the charge to the elevator. Unfortunately, they were all far too big to fit inside, and Henry managed to catch them all before they could figure out a solution. After this incident, he decided to fire Ballora as a financial advisor and sacrificed an employee to get a shock collar on her. Now that he was down an engineer, Henry decided to open up job applications for someone to replace him. To ensure that people would
Poor
actually
engineer.
know about this, Henry made
didn't
a
deserve
commercial
that.
to advertise the employment opportunity to only the most valuable TV channels. This proceeded to interrupt Michael Afton's 3:27 a.m. viewing of his favorite soap opera. Seeing Henry advertising his father's business confused and irritated Michael, so he went to the kitchen to wait out the advertisement. As he stood there, though, Mike noticed a note on the fridge William had left before his disappearance. This was when he learned the truth of what happened to his sister, something he never actually thought about until right then. After several weeks of isolation, Michael had become rather delusional, so he interpreted this note as a direct request from William. Now, with proper motivation and a desire to please his father, wherever he may be, Michael took it upon himself to get a deadly job once more. To ensure that Henry actually
Michael
let him
loves
land the
working,
job,
man.
Michael made a point to bring deodorant with him so it wouldn't be a problem this time. When this still didn't convince him, Michael just threatened to deactivate the animatronics again, and that was enough to scare Henry into accepting him.
What?
Meanwhile, the Funtime animatronics began growing restless. Bitter that William Afton had apparently left them to be stuck under Henry's management, they began holding it against him and agreed to take revenge if he ever came back. Once Michael had arrived at the facility on his first night, Baby took immediate notice that he looked similar enough to William that it was probably the same person. After thinking about how to take advantage of the situation,
That's why Baby
he
hates you
hatched
so
an
much in that
elaborate
game.
scheme to both escape and greatly inconvenience William. Ballora, of course, was completely on board with this plan. Any effort to spite her ex-husband was worthwhile in her eyes, so there was no issue there. Funtime Foxy was very motivated to assist in this plan as well, likely due to an instinctive knowledge that he only existed to be inferior to the other animatronics. Lastly, Funtime Freddy agreed to the plan not out of an existing grudge or anything, but just because it sounded like a pretty fun time. The next night, with everyone in position, the mission was underway. First, Baby sent out her biddy babs to figure out how tall William was. Instead, they just wanted to chew on him, so she intervened and helped him hide under the desk until they got bored. When that didn't work, Funtime Freddy got out one of his spare hand puppets to chew on the wiring until it caused a power outage. Then, as William crawled through Ballora Gallery to get to the electric room, Ballora would taunt him with her masterful ballet routine and vague hints at her past frustrations with him. As this flew over his head,
Too
gave
scary.
up and let Funtime Freddy take over. Unfortunately, Bon Bon was programmed to gaslight Freddy at a moment's notice. As a result, Freddy was powerless to stop William from rebooting the power generator, and he got away once again. The next day, Baby framed Freddy for a robbery that some technicians were talking about that morning. So, he was deactivated for psychological repairs, while Bon Bon tried to attack William alone. Given Bon Bon was incredibly small, this strategy was fruitless. However, the Animatronics finally had a moment of success, as Funtime Foxy jumped William and helped Baby stuff him into a prototype Springlock suit. She was pretty sure it would guilt-trip William, but it seemed to have no significance to him. Despite how absurdly risky this was, it was the only way to keep him still until they could scope out his measurements. After an entire day of nobody noticing anything wrong, Ballora deliberately acted out so she could smuggle her mini-Renas to the scooping room. After Ballora's stomach cavity was opened by the scooper, the mini-Renas crawled out and began measuring William's height. For reasons they weren't clued in on, they also
that's what they were doing.
Crawl down his throat and measure his insides as well. As he frantically kept the spring locks from snapping, they got all their work done and gave Baby the go-ahead to let him out. On the final day of their plan, Baby and Foxy gathered the endoskeletons of Freddy and Ballora and piled them into the scooping room. Once that was done, they got a spare endoskeleton nicknamed Yendo to scoop them and fuse them all together. Sure, he'd get left behind, but Yendo didn't really have issues with the management of the facility, so he was fine staying. After perfectly aligning their body with the measurements they gathered, he used some of their leftover pieces to make dummies that would both look like terrifying casualties, and trick the hand unit system into thinking every animatronic was in their proper place. Although the new Funtime amalgamation didn't really need a name, they thought it'd be fun to come up with one anyway. Their best idea was a pun, so they stuck with that and called themselves Ennard. So, that night, Ennard placed Baby's shell onto the parts and service conveyor belt and waited for William to show up. Once he did, Baby started throwing herself a pity party and told William that to help her, he needed to follow her instructions exactly. Everything was finally going smoothly. But this was never William. This was Michael.
It was Michael.
And Michael had a bit of a problem with taking orders at this point. So when Baby started giving him directions to the scooping room, he just went the exact opposite way. This led him to Henry's private room, which William previously used for most of his Remnant research, nightmare chamber monitoring, and early forms of online mischief. Ennard was very displeased with this turn of events.
What?
Thinking William early forms of
I miss him a lot. Does anyone have a good advice for morning? Get good, loser. Oh my god, that's so
Ennard was
mean.
very displeased with this turn of events, thinking William was doing this just to mess with them. After an unnecessary detour to grab a silly mask, they snuck into the back area of the private room. Once inside, Ennard started making it very obvious who they thought Michael was. Mike, relieved that this was all just a big misunderstanding, explained that he was just William's son. Ennard, now reconsidering their initial plan, asked if there was any way for them to still be free from Henry's terrible management. Without a second thought, Mike snuck them home with him, and the semi-reunited family lived a long, happy life. Everything was finally going smoothly.
Psych!
Although they incorrectly assumed that this was William, Michael still followed Baby's commands exactly as she instructed. Although he was getting tired of this, he was desperate to finally free his sister. When he arrived at the scooping room, Ennard explained their true goal. They wanted to look just like Michael. Mike, not really getting the hint, assumed he was being complimented for his good looks, and began writing an autograph.
Oh
While
no!
Mike was occupied, Ennard activated the scooper and started evacuating Michael's organs and skeleton before crawling inside his skin. Once this was done, they immediately waltzed out the elevator and stole Mike's rightfully earned employee bonus before scarfing it down in one bite.
Oh,
Getting back to
jeez.
Michael's house, Ennard realized they had nothing to really do with their time, so they began a habit of socializing with all of the neighbors every day. They became quite popular with everyone, but unfortunately, they forgot that the human body decomposes when it's missing everything that keeps it alive. What truly alerted them that they made a big mistake, though, was that all of the neighbors had been calling them Michael this entire time.
Oof.
Realizing that they had eviscerated an innocent man's body to play glorified dress-up, they ejected themselves from his skin, and Baby coughed up some remnant for him to survive. Michael had absolutely no clue what was going on, but after hearing Baby incessantly tell him he wouldn't die, he finally possessed his newfound purple skin and walked off. He still had no bones. Now shunned by the local populace for his decomposing body, Michael
What a
became
way this all played out.
forcefully isolated from society, he crafted a crude effigy of William to constantly talk to and feel appreciated by. However, this didn't satisfy Michael. As the years passed, he grew more and more desperate for emotional support, so he decided he wanted to create an animatronic father figure to replace William. Unfortunately, Mike couldn't just go out and buy the materials needed to do this, so he prioritized a different goal. He wanted to restore his body to be able to leave his house. Looking at some preserved meat in his freezer, he realized that he could possibly engineer the refrigerator to fully regenerate his organs. It wouldn't be easy, but it had a chance to work. By the arrival of the
Okay.
new millennium, Henry shut down Fazbear Entertainment for good. Ever since the animatronics escaped, Henry had to resort to utilizing the abandoned animatronics as replacements. Sadly, Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals just couldn't garner the appeal it once had without the original fun times.
Of course, those things were
Henry
ugly.
finally rebranded the company as Chica's Party World and made somewhat competent replacements for the fun times, it was already too late. The company's reputation floundered and there was no saving it. So, for the next couple decades, Henry resorted to being a door-to-door salesman to try and forget his past failures. After all this time, urban legends about the abandoned Freddy's locations began spreading across Hurricane. By 2022, a man legally named Phone Dude caught wind of these rumors and started getting ideas.
Here we
His
go.
father, Phone Guy, had a very near and dear character to his heart, Foxy. However, Fazbear Entertainment always showed the most unnecessary of hatred to the character, leading Phone Guy down a depressive spiral for years until his disappearance.
Aww.
Phone Dude knew what he had to do. He needed to avenge his father and assassinate the founders of the company for treating Foxy so poorly. To
Yeah,
his amazement,
exactly.
Henry showed up at his door one day trying to sell him some old camera equipment. This was perfect. On the spot, Phone Dude told Henry his grand vision for a horror attraction based on Freddy's, and invited him to play the part of the helpless security guard. Henry, delighted at the idea of finally making money again, happily agreed to relive his traumatic past for a quick buck. With that, they stayed in contact while Phone Dude prepared his master plan. After striking a deal with a local amusement park to open Fazbear's Fright within their space, Phone Dude carefully designed the building to be wired so horrifically it was bound to catch on fire. To really enhance the experience, he also bought out all of Henry's ancient camera equipment to make it near impossible to monitor the place. By March of 2023, the horror attraction was just about ready to open. All that was left was to find the other founder of the company, William Afton. Drawing a blank on how to find him, Phone Dude asked Henry if he knew of his old partner's whereabouts. Henry attempted to play coy, but somehow gave perfect directions to the abandoned Freddy's location instead. Phone Dude, a little confused by this answer, decided it was worth a shot and made
Why
his way to
not?
the building
Yeah.
to pry William out of there. After investigating the building all over and finding nothing but Seinfeld tapes and dismembered parts, he
Seinfeld
suddenly
tapes
heard
are
an angry
back.
shout coming from the boarded-up safe room. After kicking down the door, he saw a frustrated animatronic beating up an old arcade machine. After taking a brief look at the high
Foxy.
scores, Phone Dude tackled Springtrap and threw him into his truck. Fascinated by how much the world advanced, Springtrap hammered Phone Dude with questions about what all had changed. Not really caring enough to talk to him, Phone Dude threw Springtrap a smartphone and told him to go crazy. Springtrap immediately adapted to this new technology and really put himself out there. After they arrived at the attraction, Phone Dude shot Springtrap with bear tranquilizer and tossed him into the building without a care in the world. Once Henry clocked in for his second night
I
on the
guess
job,
that works
Phone Dude told him
on
he had
him.
found a real animatronic rather than William to try and poorly disguise his real intentions. After that, he played some old recordings of Phone Guy on the speakers to try and guilt-trip Henry before the inevitable demolition of Fazbear's Fright. Henry did not notice. Springtrap, horrifically delirious, decided to try and walk off the tranquilizer by taking a stroll through the building. Tripping over several knickknacks from his old restaurants, he began to reminisce about his creations so much that they appeared before him as phantoms.
Oh.
He wasn't too happy with the selection of characters that appeared, but after ripping off Foxy's hook, he decided to leave well enough alone. After
What?
the phantoms took a gander at the building, they all lit themselves on fire in an attempt to warn Springtrap that something was going to go wrong. He wasn't aware enough to take the hint though, so he just ignored them and kept walking. As he approached the office, he was suddenly shocked into furious lucidity with just one glance at the man behind the window. Springtrap's swelling rage over being trapped in the safe room playing Pack-and-Pal for 30 years was enough for him to wage war against Henry. Henry,
Oh.
however, hadn't even noticed Springtrap standing there. With the awful ventilation in the building, he was in the middle of hallucinating dreams of animatronics and janitors phasing through walls to give ghosts cake. By the time he jolted back to consciousness, the phantoms had been bribed to Springtrap's cause and started a full assault on all the attractions.
I love
equipment.
FNAF 3.
Luckily, Henry was great at rebooting things that should have stopped operating already, so this was no problem. Now fueled by the thrill of battle, Henry kept coming back to Fazbear's Fright to go toe-to-toe with Springtrap. Due to the lack of oxygen though, Henry couldn't really fight him head-on. Instead, Henry resorted to mildly disorienting Springtrap's sense of direction with clips of Balloon Boy's voice. This was pretty obviously a trick, but Springtrap didn't want to miss the chance to see his greatest creation again, so he always double-checked to be sure it wasn't just audio lures. This wasted a lot of time. Eventually though,
Just
he
running
did
all around the
successfully make
building.
his way to the office, just to be met with Henry frantically tapping the wall tiles. Unfortunately, before Springtrap could give him a long-awaited death stare, Henry's camera monitor short-circuited and ignited the whole office. In record time, the entire building was on fire and the place was caving in. While the Phantoms yelled at them with phrases such as, "We told you so," Henry and Springtrap suddenly realized the attraction was a setup. They were not about to let someone else kill them before they could kill each other, so they made a truce and started
Oh, they made a
running. As soon as
truce!
they escaped the front door, Fazbear's Fright had completely
What
erupted.
the action
Bones,
movie is
who had been
this?
camping outside all week, was positively distraught. While he was re-evaluating his choice to let random chance decide the fate of his victims, a Foxy mask fell in front of him and burst into flames. Realizing he had
His
disgraced
favorite.
his bloodline with his failure, Phone Dude exiled himself from society for the rest of his
Aw,
days.
that's
After Henry
sad.
and Springtrap gathered their bearings, the local news department raced over to the wreckage and started taking photos for their dying newspaper. To avoid being sold at an auction, the duo played dead under some rubble until everyone left. Once everybody was gone and the smoke cleared, the former partners looked at each other in awkward silence, waiting for the other to break the truce. After about 32 seconds, Henry grabbed the wire sticking out of Springtrap's ear, got it to spark, and then lit Springtrap's pants on fire before running away.
What?
Springtrap, distraught and ashamed by this attack, decided the only way to redeem himself would be to find a replacement for his entire suit. Luckily for him, Springtrap remembered he still had a backup fursuit he had left at Fredbear's family diner. After a few days, he finally got inside and realized why it was abandoned there to begin with. That thing was occupied. Springtrap was too embarrassed now to let this stop him though, so he proceeded to tear the costume off of Harold the janitor's skeleton. Once this was done, he just needed to get rid of his current suit. His most rational decision was to ram himself against the wall until it fell apart. This worked a bit too effectively, and he managed to break most of his left arm off by
Oh,
mistake.
shit.
He decided this was good enough, so he went ahead and put on the suit. Worried that everyone would only know the name Springtrap as the animatronic with no pants though, he reluctantly made the call to go back to the name William Afton to avoid scrutiny. Bidding a solemn farewell to his favorite fursuit, William departed from Fredbear's to aimlessly wander Hurricane. Meanwhile, at the
My man
Fazbear
is
Fright
back.
auction, the ghosts of the missing children decided it was time to say goodbye to Hurricane and pass on to whatever was to come. So, Charlie put together one last party in a purgatory pizzeria for them all to celebrate a new beginning. However, conflict arose very quickly. Charlie didn't actually know how to make a good tasting cake with only remnant and frosting, so she quickly thought of a way to save herself embarrassment.
Everyone, look, it's William Afton.
Oh,
Insulted by what they assumed was a rude prank, all of the children ditched Charlie to go back to haunting Hurricane. Cassidy decided
no
to
cake for
reconvene
anyone, I
Andrew,
guess.
who was just chilling at the rejects table wearing an alligator mask. She immediately ripped it off his face and told him to hop onto her shoulders. Once he agreed, they went back to terrorizing Hurricane as their ghostly fusion body.
Golden Freddy.
Charlie, with nobody to brave the unknown with, chickened out and repossessed the puppet, who was still perfectly intact after all this time. The other 4 children, however, had to figure out a new vessel to possess. Since all of their original suits were split up in the auction, they preferred finding something to stick together in. Luckily for them, they were able to find a pile of wires slithering around in the sewers and possessed it. This turned out to be Ennard. 4 new spirits intruding on their existence caused quite a lot of discomfort. Ballora, furious that she had to babysit 4 new children, decided it was time for her own daughter to move out. After briefly conspiring with the children, she tugged out a random wire and successfully ejected Baby on her first try. This wound up being a bad decision on Ballora's part, as without Baby to call the shots, the missing children established an oligarchy. Once they successfully silenced Ballora, they hightailed it over to the abandoned Chica's party world in search of some decoration to make them really stand out. After some searching, they found Yendo, who tried proudly showing off his cheap plastic shell to what he assumed were his old friends. Instead, Ennard lit him on fire and stole his melted remains afterward, now dubbing themselves Molten Freddy. Baby, meanwhile, had followed them to the building with the same general idea. After a quick dumpster dive, she was able to find enough garbage to reconstruct her body. With that, she quickly came up with the name Scrap Baby, just in case her condition wasn't obvious. Within just a day, Hurricane's cryptid count jumped from 1 to 6. This was more than enough to catch Henry's attention, and he felt a little bit responsible for this mess.
Yeah, because you
Henry
are.
wanted to try and course correct the fate of Utah and make
Felt
his
a little
legacy
bit
less
responsible?
awful. So, he stole a boatload of old animatronics, quickly crafted some new ones, and bought out an empty building under William Afton's name to avoid legal attention. Henry felt inspired by Phone Dude's failed assassination attempt on him, and he decided to steal the idea. But make it actually work this time. All he had to do was revitalize his company, attract families to his new pizzeria, and if the deadly animatronics showed up, set the place on fire.
Burn
Easy.
them.
But first, he needed to hire a
Easy
manager
work.
to do the actual work for him and act as a shield against unwanted legal attention.
That was us.
He attempted this a concerning amount of times. Expecting this job to go smoothly, while simultaneously giving no clear instructions as to what he wanted, several managers came to work and were promptly fired for various reasons. With one listening to Henry's top-secret diary, another being too chicken to salvage the animatronics, and yet another getting the place sued for kicks and giggles, every manager's run ended up in disaster. Henry was at a loss as to who could possibly run this place competently and accidentally do exactly what he wanted. Luckily, this pizzeria was built right in front of Michael Afton's house. Mike had made incredible strides in his refrigerator regeneration research. After all this time, he had finally grown back, at least some of his organs. He wasn't really sure which ones, but he felt healthy enough to finally go outside.
My man does not look healthy though.
Opportunity right at his doorstep, he excitedly signed on to become the manager of Freddy Fazbear's pizza place. The building, having been horrendously downsized after all of the managerial failures that
this is one of my favorite FNAF games, by the way.
More than a small shack with nothing inside. Luckily, Mike was blessed with the Afton genes of incredible financial literacy. Every day, he restored a portion of the restaurant to its former glory. Not only that, each night an animatronic would pop up in the alley to check out what was going on, and Michael got paid to salvage each one and throw them in the vents. First, Molten Freddy. Hearing about a new pizzeria excited them, as they were getting a little sick of being a pile of wires suppressing the voice of a middle-aged woman. With this new location, though, they could perhaps find some new, separate bodies to possess, and make use of the complete collection of Seinfeld episodes they robbed from someone's house.
Can we get over
Mike,
that?
Seeing them so proud of a show that wasn't his favorite, lit the collection on fire and walked away. Molten Freddy, with 4 out of 5 of their spirits now shattered, trailed behind him in a desperate quest for revenge. The next night, Michael was elated to find that the animatronic before him was William. He didn't particularly expect his father to return after all this time as a moldy rabbit, but he'd take what he could get. Unfortunately, William didn't really care. He just bragged about how he knew this pizzeria was a trap, given that there were fire hazard signs all over the place. After that, he started trying to workshop new names for himself, such as Scrap Trap, with Michael to no avail. Mike felt betrayed by his father's nonchalance about their grand reunion, so he tased William and threw him into Henry's office to make it his problem. The next day, Scrap Baby finally arrived at the pizzeria. Having done just about everything on her bucket list, from becoming Utah's roller skating champion to inspiring an entire fashion craze, she decided that the most reasonable next step was to start murdering people with a giant claw. She had already visited once before to assassinate one of the previous managers, so she figured this would be a piece of cake. To her disappointment, Michael was prepared for this and signed a restraining order on her. Since she already came all this way, though, she just wandered into the ventilation system to try and convince herself this entire pizzeria was actually a gift for her.
Absolutely.
At this point, William finally regained consciousness and immediately tried to attack Henry. Henry, without a care in the world, just threatened William with a lighter and told him about his newest creation. After having it on his to-do list for decades, he finally created a beautiful animatronic named Lefty. Not only that, it actually managed to capture the puppet. Unfortunately, Henry only found out the puppet was his daughter after he trapped her inside a plastic bear, and he didn't really know how to let her out.
I was even going to sell it to your son for $5, but Michael wound up salvaging it. I may or may not be down $5,000 instead.
You gave him $5,000?
Yes. Now I'm bankrupt again.
Enraged that Michael robbed him of the chance to finally get his $5 back, William scrambled into the vents to try and
My man just wants those $5 back, bro. Come on.
His son. Mike was an expert at keeping everyone at bay, though, and after a few more days of unmatched success with his pizzeria, he had reached the most important day of his career. This, however, is when Scrap Baby decided to gloat about being stuck there. She was really desperate to justify any reason for staying this long, so she just tried pushing the narrative that William set this place up for her so she could kill children and make him proud. Nobody believed her, seeing as William was right there with no stake in this other than getting his money. Tired of listening to Baby ramble, Henry interrupted her and finally delivered a speech he had been rehearsing for the past month or so. Although he mostly just made guesses about everyone's motivations for being there, all the animatronics were impressed by his performance. So much so that they didn't even notice that the building was on fire. Michael, only paying attention when Henry mentioned an exit planned for him, immediately rushed out of there before the fire could kill him. The smoke did get to him a little bit though, and he wound up coughing up some stray remnant. Hopefully he didn't need that. The others, however, weren't so lucky.
He probably did.
Soon, each and every one of the animatronics were destroyed as the building was engulfed in flames. With that, Henry finally ended the horrific legacy of Fazbear Entertainment.
There it is.
Just kidding. After the smoke cleared, everyone in Hurricane arrived at the ruins of the pizzeria to see what had happened. While random civilians took off with the remaining animatronics and games that survived the fire, a rescue team discovered a body in the ventilation system and rushed it to the hospital. Not really questioning why this clearly charred corpse was wearing a rabbit suit, the doctor accepted it as a patient and diagnosed it with a coma. While the hospital searched for anyone that actually knew who this was, a single visitor showed up that they just kind of assumed was a relative, Golden Freddy. When they arrived at the patient's bedside, they immediately knew it was William Afton and plunged into his mind to cause
What
crazy
the hell?
nightmares. William, now
Golden
dreaming
Freddy
about
just
a character
pulled up.
select screen of various animatronics he had some general hand in creating, decided that the best course of action was to fight them all at once in their most deadly state. Unbeknownst to him, of course, this was a setup by Cassidy and Andrew. Andrew never got to take revenge on William like all the other kids did, so he begged Cassidy to drag everyone she knew away from a peaceful afterlife to help torture William in his sleep. The most insidious part of this plan, however, was taking the newest iteration of Foxy they could find and making him William's only ally in this nightmare. Eventually, William was conditioned to
If only it could get worse for William. Like this man has been through it a lot. And the last thing that they could put him through is, hey, Foxy's your homeboy. And he's just like, damn it.
finally appreciate Foxy's existence, which
Oh.
was the most severe punishment the Golden Duo could imagine for him.
Uh-oh.
After getting the satisfaction of killing William over and over again, Andrew started getting a bit full of himself and started taking credit for all of the work Cassidy had put in. Not only
Cassidy's
that,
gonna be
he got
mad.
so self-absorbed that he regarded himself as the one you should not have killed. Cassidy wasn't having any of that, so after William somehow beat them at their own game, she ditched Andrew and everyone else followed suit. When William awoke, he realized Michael was wheeling him out of the hospital. Excited that he somehow avoided all the possible consequences of his actions, he began to concoct some brand new schemes. Right as Michael shoved him back into the wrecked pizzeria and walked home. Michael had gotten what he needed from his father. In fact, he got everything he needed from just about everyone. Getting to manage at successful Freddy's was one of the best experiences he ever had.
I'm happy
and he
for
wasn't
him.
satisfied with the place being destroyed after only a week.
Oh.
He created
Well, I
a
wouldn't
new
be
plan,
either.
and with everyone out of his way, he bought the rights to the defunct Fazbear Entertainment and began constructing
$5.
their themed empire. With that, we reach the end of this chapter of the timeline.
It gets better, boys. It gets better. Trust me. Dude, the way that this is written is great.
Yes, yes. There's still much to unravel, and I must vanish again to make preparations. We're approaching the end, don't you worry. Just hope that Ferdinand doesn't tamper with anything. That'd certainly be inconvenient. Speaking of which, he must have left while we weren't looking. Oh well, it'll be fine. Alright, goodbye. Until next time.
Jump scare? No jump scare? I was expecting it this time. Hurricane dump. Uh-oh. Oh, I'm ready. I'm more than ready. With that being said, this was a great video. Thanks to Oof for creating part 1 and 2 of the Undeniably Canon Five Nights at Freddy's timeline. We're gonna watch part 3 in the next video. I really enjoy this. I like the way that he created this storyboard. Like, just the way he tells the story in his own way, and a lot of the different things. Like part 2, as you guys could see, was a lot different than the original timeline that we're familiar with. Part 1 kind of stuck to the story as much as possible, but part 2, you could definitely see the changes, and there was a lot of like drifting away from what the original timeline is. And I feel like part 3 is going to be exactly the same, where we're going to get even more crazy with this story. Like, some of the things, like the whole, just pay your friends back, okay? If we would have just paid that man $5 back, none of this would have happened. And it's also interesting to see that William was able to take out the kids by just staring at them. Like little subtle things like that are funny in my opinion. I really think that this is a great series, and you guys should check it out yourselves if you haven't. This is great. Shouts out Oof. And thank you guys so much for recommending this. We will finish it up in the next video. Thank you guys. Hit the like button, and I'll see you guys next time.
Hope will never die.
Work it out, make it happen. stop playing with me.